Welcome to Personal Profile. Our guest is one of the nation's leading political figures. Member of a prominent New England family, he's won his spurs as a writer, as a naval hero, and as a politician. He was an honor graduate of Harvard in 1940. He wrote a book, Why England Slept, an excellent analysis of why Great Britain was unprepared for World War II. During World War II, he was a PT boat commander in the South Pacific, decorated twice. After the war, he returned home. In 1946, he was elected to Congress. He served 3 terms in the House of Representatives, and then in 1952, he was elected to the Senate, the 3rd Democrat in the history of the state of Massachusetts to be elected to the Senate. In 1954 and 55, he was convalescing from an old injury dating back to the war, and he wrote another book, this one called Profiles in Courage, a book that received the Pulitzer Award. Now, in the Senate, he serves on the Senate Labor and Public Welfare Committee and also on the Foreign Relations Committee. In addition, he serves on these special committees: the Special Committee to investigate lobbying, the Special Committee to investigate labor racketeering, and the Special Committee honoring distinguished senators of the past. He's received awards from many colleges and universities and civic groups. And in 1956, he received the award, the Outstanding Statesman of the Year, from the University of Notre Dame. It's a great pleasure to welcome to Personal Profile Senator John Fitzgerald Kennedy of Massachusetts.
Well, it's a great pleasure to be here, and I appreciate those kind words.
Well, Senator, before we get into questions about politics and what may happen to the Democratic Party in the next election, let's go back for a moment to the early 1940s when you were in the Solomon Islands skippering of a PT boat. Now, in those days, did you think that when the war was over, you'd go back to writing, or did you think you'd have a political career?
Well, as a matter of fact, I wanted to go back to writing. I had an older brother who had been a delegate to the Democratic Convention in 1940 at the age of 24, who I thought would be a politician. Well, he was killed as a flyer in Europe. And when I came back, I went to work first for a newspaper, the Chicago Herald-American, and then I worked for INS for a while. And then the congressional seat where I lived became vacant, and I ran then, and was elected, and now I'm a politician.
Well, now, this was a seat, Senator, wasn't it, that was held by another member of your family?
Yes,
earlier?
My grandfather had been a congressman. In fact, I think he was the only Democrat from New England at the time that he was here, about 55 or 60 years ago. And then I had another grandfather who was a state senator from the district, and another great-uncle who was a state senator from the district, so that the ties went back a long time.
Politics runs in your family.
Yes, it does. I'm glad to hear you use the word politician with such affirmation. It's a great profession, and though it has fallen into disrepute in some ways, nevertheless, in the true sense of the word, politician is one who takes part in the science and art of government, and therefore it should be an honorable profession. And it is.
Should be the leading profession.
And it is, particularly when government plays such a large part in all of our lives, affects everything we do, all of us. Obviously, we should want the best men we can running it, and we should regard the profession, we should have men who make the profession well respected, and the people should support those men of either party.
But now, Senator, in your political career, you've had many awards, you've achieved a great many things. From your own personal standpoint, what do you consider the most important thing?
Well, I think serving in the Senate, I think it's extreme. I have a great feeling for Massachusetts, and I have a great feeling for the Senate, which is a most unusual body in all political organizations or constitutional organizations, and its powers for good and I suppose bad are great. Its influence over foreign affairs, national defense, all of our domestic economy is tremendous. It has a great many men of talent who are permitted to stay in the Senate for a long enough time to really develop it into an effective spokesman for their people and the country. So that I would say being a senator from the state of Massachusetts is as great an honor, really, as anyone could have.
Well, now, you headed the special committee, Senator Kennedy, to honor distinguished senators of the past, 5. How did you go about selecting them?
Well, the committee was set up, really, in order to attempt to remind people and the senators of what great men we've had in the past and those qualities which make a great senator. So there was a 5-man committee, and first we wrote to we set up an advisory committee of 9 of the foremost historians of the country around the country, and then we asked them to set up what they considered to be satisfactory qualifications. And then we got a list of the 200 most prominent historians from all parts of the country, and we polled all of them. Then we polled all members of the Senate, and we got a lot of newspapers who wrote editorials suggesting various people. A number of senators proposed 5 senators from their own state. But nevertheless, on the whole, we got very interesting suggestions. And of the 5 men we picked, Clay, Calhoun, Webster, interestingly enough, all contemporaries and probably known as the great triumvirate, the greatest senators that ever served in the Senate. And 2 from the 20th century, George Norris, the great progressive from Nebraska, and Taft, who was a spokesman for the conservative movement. And the 4 out of the 5 were the top 4 out of the 5 choice of the, we picked, La Follette and Taft, though George Norris and La Follette ran neck and neck. And 4 out of the 5 that we picked were the top 4 out of the 5 choices of the historians and of the senators. And the 5th man, Senator Taft, was the #1 choice of the senators, and within the first 10 of the historians. So we feel that we ran a balanced ticket, but one which represented the main currents of Senate thought. I suppose the top man we picked perhaps was Henry Clay, who 40 years a senator and who combined all the great qualities which go into making a senator.
Well, Senator Kennedy, in American folklore, the good man always wins. The courageous man comes out on top. But that certainly is not true of some of the men who are depicted in your book, Profiles in Courage. Now, in chapter 6, it's about a man by the name of Edmund G. Ross, that I'm sure very few Americans know anything about. Yet you use these words: "In a lonely grave, forgotten and unknown, lies the man who saved a president, and who, as a result, may well have preserved for ourselves and posterity constitutional government in the United States. The man who performed in 1868 what one historian has called the most heroic act in American history, incomparably more difficult than any deed of valor upon the field of battle, but a United States Senator, whose name no one recalls, Edmund G. Ross of Kansas." Now, why would a man like Ross sacrifice his political career when he knew that not only his enemies, but his friends would not appreciate it?
Well, that's, of course, true. When people disagree with you in politics, they don't say, well, I admire his courage in saying that. They always place, it's always a personal attack takes place, and the same thing happened to Ross. Ross played a decisive role at the time of the impeachment of Andrew Johnson. His party, the Republicans, were attempting to impeach Johnson because he was vetoing some of the acts that they were passing after the Civil War. He disliked Johnson and ran on an anti-Johnson platform from Kansas, but when he came here, he thought the grounds for impeachment were inadequately drawn, and therefore that it was unconstitutional. They needed his vote. They needed a 2/3 vote, and they were short 1 vote. 6 other Republicans also stood with Ross, but their votes were announced from the beginning. Ross was studying the evidence until the end. He finally voted when the roll call was held no. The impeachment failed by 1 vote. Neither Ross nor the other 6 Republicans who voted against the impeachment of Andrew Johnson of the opposite political party were ever returned to the Senate again. Ross lived in humiliation and disgrace for the rest of his term. He was beaten up physically. He went back to Kansas, became an assistant to an printer. Finally, at the end of his career, Grover Cleveland appointed him as governor of New Mexico when it was the territory, and he's buried there. In fact, I met his grandson recently when I was out there, who's become a Democrat, I suppose, as a result. But nevertheless, as a Democrat or Republican, Ross was an unusual figure because he had everything to gain and nothing by going the other way. And yet he went and followed his conscience, and it lost. But there aren't had to be. Leo DeRocha said that nice guys finish last. Well, I don't know whether that's true, but obviously if you're going to have political courage, you have to take the consequences, and Ross did. I think the point that it makes is that the American people have to respond to it, and even if they don't always agree with it. The trouble is, all of us, we appreciate those who think like we do, and we are opposed to those who think the other way, even though their motives may be completely good.
Quite often we have the feeling that a man who thinks the way we do is very bright.
I know, very bright and very brave.
And if he does not, then he's not very bright.
I very rarely hear people say, well, I disagree with him completely, but I admire him tremendously.
Well, now, Mr. Ross and some of the others lost their careers, and Ross apparently was right when he said that before the vote I looked down into my political grave.
That's right. If the Johnson had been impeached, it would have meant that the Congress would have become more dominant than the executive, which I think we want equal branches, not one where the Congress is the strongest. So that I think that Ross made a great contribution to our system, and at his own personal loss. Out of the 8 men, 4 of them ended up in difficulty and lost by it. The other 4, the people responded to their courage after the first tempest of emotion had passed. But when you talk about political courage, you mean somebody who's willing to go against the wishes of his constituents for what he considers the best interests of the country. Well, a lot of times the constituents at first don't appreciate that, and they may defeat him. Later, they may.
Do you think this happens today, or is this?
Oh, it does. On every vote, the issues aren't quite as dramatic as they were because the issues come so fast now. This week we have one thing, next week on another. But powerful groups feel strongly on every issue. And when you don't do what they want you to do, or you don't do it in the way they want you to do it, then they turn on you. So that every congressman or senator is continually having people who disagree with them strongly. Some stand up, some don't. Some stand up in one issue and not on another. But I think that considering the pressures to move hither and yon with every group, that there's a good deal of courage shown in the Senate. Not complete, but nevertheless, we will get more if the people respond to it more.
Senator Kennedy, as a member of the Foreign Relations Committee, you have an opportunity to get briefed on all of the important foreign relations problems, what we're trying to do about them. What do you consider the #1 problem we have today in the field of foreign relations?
I think the #1 problem, of course, is to win the support of all of the people who, as of today, are uncommitted, particularly in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia, who are maintaining a neutral position between the Soviet Union and ourselves. And they are countries which have been held under colonial domination. And they desire to be free, and they desire to do something about a very extremely low standard of living. And I suppose for the United States to demonstrate our interest in them, our desire to help them lift themselves up, the feeling that they can win a reasonable place in the world through democratic procedures rather than turning to the communists. Now, this becomes difficult in cases where countries are held by Western powers under colonial control. Then our problem becomes more difficult. We want to befriend these people. We fight against communism when it happens in Hungary, which we should. Against communist imperialism or colonialism, we have to show the same policies towards those of our allies who hold colonial possessions through the world. In other words, we have to win the support of the people who hold a balance of power in the world by making them feel that we're vitally interested in them. And this power, this desire to be free and run your own destiny is the best weapon we have. It is certainly the thing that is going to cause the greatest discomfort to the Soviet Union. This feeling in Hungary and Poland and East Germany and Lithuania and Latvia and Estonia, the desire of these people to be independent and to have the communists out of their government. That is the best force we have. It's the best force within the Soviet Union itself. People who don't want to be held down by a totalitarian system. So that we have to support that force in the West, in Africa, in Asia, behind the Iron Curtain. How we do that is, to me, the great problem that we have in the UN and out of it. But I think that's where we have to direct ourselves. And we have to hew the line of supporting the desire of people to be independent against the Soviet Union and against those of our allies who occasionally may have transgressed. But that's a difficult job. It's easy to be against one communist imperialism, but when it's rather difficult sometimes when our friends are involved. But that's, I think, the position we have to take.
I'm sorry, Senator, but our time's run out.
No, it's a pleasure to be on here with you.
Our pleasure on having Senator John Fitzgerald Kennedy of Massachusetts here in Washington on Personal Profile.